Saturday mornings in Paradise Valley were usually quiet, at least on my side of the gate. Birds chirped without the competition of traffic, the breeze carried the scent of trimmed citrus trees, and my house sat peacefully behind its stone privacy wall, guarded by silent security cameras and an automated entry system. I was nursing my second cup of black coffee when the alert pinged on my phone. Motion detected at the front gate. The screen lit up. A black SUV was parked outside. Unusual, but not shocking. I had meetings lined up for the following week, but none for today. I tapped to switch to the gate's live feed and instantly froze. Standing outside were my parents, both of them, dressed like they'd come for brunch. Calm, presentable, alive. I blinked, hoping it was a trick of memory or a bad signal. It wasn't. My mother adjusted the collar of her blouse, and my father, as always, kept his hands in his pockets, like this was just another Sunday visit. 9 years. 9 years since I last saw either of them. 9 years since they looked me in the eye and said nothing while I was erased from the family, from the records, from existence. They said I was dead, I whispered, the words barely audible even to myself. So why are they here, standing like they haven't killed me in every way that counts? I didn't rush to the door. I didn't even move. I stood there, watching them breathe, blink, look around as if they belonged in my world. And then I walked, slowly, deliberately, to the gate. But I didn't open it. I remember that last conversation like it happened this morning, not 9 years ago. I was 28, sitting in my childhood kitchen, the marble counters polished, the light just a little too bright. My mother stirred tea she wouldn't drink, and my father stared out the window as if I hadn't just said I wasn't marrying the man they picked, wasn't staying in Arizona, and most importantly, wasn't going to live by their playbook anymore. "You're being dramatic," she said, without meeting my eyes. "This whole independence thing, it's performative." I'd laughed. I shouldn't have. "It's not a performance, Mom. It's just me finally not letting you script the entire damn show." Her hand froze over the cup. "We gave you everything. You should be grateful. You gave me a box to suffocate in." My father finally spoke, softly, like he was already tired of the conversation. "We raised you right. If you want to throw it away, that's your choice." I packed a bag that afternoon. Not out of spite, just clarity. I thought I'd be gone a week, maybe 2. I needed space. I never imagined how permanent that space would become. At first, I kept in touch, called, texted. None were returned. Then, slowly, friends stopped answering too. I walked into a grocery store one day, and the cashier, someone I went to school with, stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. "I thought you passed," she whispered, scanning my items. I laughed it off. "I got a haircut." But something cracked that day. It was a month later when the envelope arrived. No return address, no note, just a single piece of paper, folded neatly. My death certificate. It took me a full minute to realize what I was looking at. Name: Alethea Marie Gray. Date of death: April 9th, 2016. Cause: vehicular accident. Filed by Dimity Gray. Relationship: mother. It felt like the oxygen had been yanked out of the room. I sat on the floor, the cheap carpet scratching my bare legs, the certificate trembling in my hands. I checked the file number. Real. I checked the state stamp. Legitimate. My mother signed off on my death. And my father, he witnessed it. Not a misunderstanding. Not a bureaucratic error. They declared me dead, on paper, officially, fully. I remember the numbness more than the rage. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at a version of myself that no longer had a pulse. I thought of the funeral they probably held, the eulogies they gave, the photo collages with me smiling in high school, all while knowing I was somewhere, alive, breathing, reading the obituary of my own life. It had to be about something. Money, reputation, clean narratives. Or maybe it was simpler. Maybe they just preferred the version of me that didn't contradict them. I packed my things that night, all of them. I changed my name, rented a room in a town nobody remembered, bought a prepaid phone, vanished. If they wanted me gone, I could play that role better than they imagined. The world doesn't know how to treat the legally dead. Banks froze my accounts. The DMV flagged my license as expired due to deceased status. I had to start over, not just emotionally but legally. I went by my middle name, then changed it entirely, built new credit, got a new job under a new identity. At first, it felt like living inside a lie. Then, it became the truth. I didn't go to my cousin's wedding. I didn't call my grandmother on her last birthday. I watched from afar as family photos were updated without me, memories rewritten with selective lenses. I grieved them, and I grieved myself. Grief is cruel, but grieving someone who's still alive? That's brutality. Back at the gate, the present snapped into focus. They were still standing there. My mother adjusted her earrings, something she only did when nervous. My father checked his watch, ever impatient. And me? I didn't shake. I didn't stutter. I pressed the speaker button and said the first honest thing I'd told them in nearly a decade. You told the world I was dead. So why are you standing on my doorstep like ghosts? They didn't answer. I watched the silence stretch between us. This time, I wasn't the one waiting to be acknowledged. This time, I'm the one deciding who gets resurrected. They stepped inside my home like it was still theirs. Not a single flinch, not even a second of hesitation, just the same practiced ease they used to walk into country clubs and garden parties. As if this house, the one I built from the ashes of my own erasure, was merely an extension of their social itinerary. My mother smiled first. That smile, I'd seen it before. At my high school graduation, when she told the neighbor I'd barely scraped by, despite finishing top 10. At every church potluck where she recited half-truths about our family to keep appearances pristine. She wore that same smile when she erased me. Such a beautiful place, she said, glancing around the foyer. Her voice held that upward lilt that screamed performative delight. It's elegant. I said nothing. My father stayed quiet, observing, cataloging. Eyes drifting over the paintings, the flooring, the fixtures. Not to admire, just to assess value. It wasn't admiration, it was inventory. They sat down on the couch I didn't offer. I remained standing. The camera in the corner blinked silently, recording everything. You've done well, my father said at last, clearing his throat like it hurt to admit it. I leaned against the marble console table, arms crossed. Is that why you're here? To say good job after burying me? My mother chuckled nervously. Alethea, must we start with drama? I cocked my head. You forged a death certificate. Drama's baked into the foundation here. Their smiles didn't waver. That's the part that made my blood turn. The ease, the audacity. It was the same smile my mother wore at my funeral. It came in an email. No subject line, just a link. Sent from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity gets you when you've been legally dead. When you don't exist on paper, any trace of yourself becomes irresistible. I clicked. The video loaded slowly, buffering on a grainy connection. The setting, a small church with pale blue pews and white orchids at the pulpit. My photo was framed beside a candle. That photo, I knew exactly which one. Senior year headshot, back when I still wore pastel sweaters to blend in with the neighborhood daughters. A slideshow played in the background. Me at 4 in a tutu, me on a bike, me at Christmas, strategically cropped beside Imogen. Then came the voice. My mother stood at the podium, gripping a tissue like it held her conscience together. Alethea was difficult, she began. But we loved her. Cue the shaky inhale. She struggled. She questioned a lot. But she had a good heart. The room nodded. My father followed next, solemn and stiff. It was an accident, that's all we know. She was driving alone, late. She always was a bit impulsive. He said that like it was a flaw that deserved death. The camera panned across rows of people I once knew. Family, friends, neighbors. They sat there, murmuring condolences, wiping eyes, hugging my parents, and none of them asked to see the body. No one noticed there wasn't a casket. Not a soul questioned the obituary published without coroner verification, because performative grief is louder than the truth, especially in America. You're not truly dead until someone posts about it on Facebook. I disappeared that night, turned off my phone, bought a burner, deleted every account I could remember. They had held a funeral for a woman who was still breathing. But what stung more, they hadn't invited me. I learned about the inheritance slip-up through my cousin Marlene. She was always a little too chatty for her own good, especially after 2 glasses of Pinot at brunch. She'd mentioned the trust. I mean, it's only fair. With you gone, Imogen would have inherited the full share eventually. That's what your mom said. My fork froze mid-air. Gone, I repeated. Calm. Marlene blinked. I just meant, you know, your situation. At the time, the paperwork. That night, I called an old college friend who now worked in estate law. Can you check something for me? Quietly, I asked. An hour later, she texted a screenshot of the family trust summary. My name had been stricken, deleted, as if I had never existed. The reason listed, deceased. I stared at it for 10 minutes. Not because I didn't understand, but because I understood perfectly. It was never about grief. It was always about control, about money, about public image, about the illusion of a tidy, manageable family with no variables, no disruptions. My mother used to quote the Bible like it was policy. Honor thy father and thy mother. My new response? Only if they don't cash you in for tax benefits. Because that's exactly what they did. I didn't use the good china. I poured them both coffee into plain ceramic mugs, the kind I used for maintenance workers or delivery folks. Nothing personalized, no warm welcome. My mother took hers with 2 sugars, no cream. Some things don't change. This place really is stunning, she said again, trying to fill the silence. My father nodded. You've done well. We've followed your progress. Progress, I echoed, dragging out the word. That's what we're calling resurrection now? They laughed. Forced. Timed. I watched them. I wanted to understand what version of reality they had built in their heads, one where all this could be smoothed over with compliments and artificial civility. You didn't expect I'd do this well, I said flatly. No, my mother admitted. We didn't. Why are you really here? They exchanged a glance. The kind only people fluent in manipulation can execute without speaking. We wanted to see you, my father said. Reconnect. You mean now that I'm profitable? Alethea. My mother's voice dipped, the practice sympathy in full performance. We never stopped loving you. I set my cup down. No sound. No mess. Just finality. Who signed the obituary filing? The smile slipped. Just slightly. What? The document, the legal one. Who signed it? She didn't answer. Her silence said everything, so I offered a gift, one final truth. Did you cry at my funeral or just collect the inheritance? The motel room smelled like bleach and something older, something that had seeped into the walls long before I arrived. Morning light pushed through plastic blinds warped by heat, casting crooked stripes across the stained bedspread. I sat on the edge of the mattress, still wearing the same jeans from yesterday, trying to remember the last time my name had meant anything. There was no sound, not even the hum of traffic. Just the buzz of the refrigerator struggling to stay alive. I looked around at what had become my new life. A battered suitcase, a half-dead flip phone, and a burner wallet with $84 left. This was the first week after I'd disappeared. After I buried myself without a casket. The first thing I did was cut my hair. Not a symbolic gesture, but strategic. No one remembers a woman with short hair when they're looking for a girl who used to wear it in soft curls. Then I bought a new phone with a cash-only plan and left behind every contact who'd ever called me Alethea Gray. Legally, I was gone, but biologically, inconveniently, I still existed. The first time I looked in the mirror and said my new name out loud, it didn't stick. I had no birthright anymore. Only breath. The first job I landed was cleaning a strip mall's back offices overnight. The manager paid cash every 2 weeks, didn't ask questions, and reminded me to avoid the security cameras. I was invisible, just how I needed to be. That's how I found the senior care facility. They needed overnight aids and barely checked credentials. I showed up, did the work, and melted into the background. That's where I met Clarabelle. She was 87 and sharper than most people half her age. She called me kid, even though I was almost 30. I helped her to the bathroom, read her newspaper out loud every morning, and made sure she got the crossword in pen, not pencil. "You've got the eyes of someone who's lost everything," she said once. "But your hands want to build something." We became close, not in a fairy tale surrogate grandmother way, but with a kind of mutual understanding. I was hiding from something, and she wasn't going to ask what. Clarabelle gave me my first blueprint for reinvention. She taught me how to apply for a tax ID under a new name, how to answer bureaucratic questions with confident vagueness, and how to sign forms without flinching. "Exist quietly," she'd say. "The loud ones get hunted." Eventually, I moved into a small, one-bedroom unit above a discount pharmacy. The paint peeled near the windows. The door lock stuck in cold weather. But it was mine. My name, my new name, was on the lease. The first night, I slept on a borrowed mattress with no sheets. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just stared at the ceiling, afraid if I exhaled too deeply, the whole illusion would collapse. 1 year in, I was working the night shift at a private home, helping a new client named Miriam, an old nurse recovering from hip surgery. She was opinionated and didn't like helpers who asked too many questions. I liked her immediately. On my third night there, while adjusting her pillows, she squinted at my badge. "Gray?" she asked. I froze. "Excuse me? Your last name? It used to be Gray?" A beat passed. I knew someone once with that name. Years ago. She died. Car accident, they said. But there was something off about it. No coroner's file, no autopsy release. I said nothing. Miriam leaned in slightly. "You look like her. Alethea Gray." I didn't breathe. I was asked to confirm she had psychiatric history. Miriam continued, eyes locked on mine. Asked to put it in writing for a legal record. Said it would help settle her affairs quietly. I refused. Next week, I was let go. No reason. Just a restructuring. Still, I said nothing. She didn't ask again. She didn't need to. As I left that night, she touched my arm gently. "They wanted to make you disappear with paperwork. I remember you because you fought back, without screaming." Back home, I sat at my small kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea and a heart full of fire. I had spent over a year convincing myself I was imagining the scale of what they'd done. That maybe it was a reaction, a mistake, a one-time betrayal born out of chaos. But Miriam's story changed everything. This wasn't just a family cutting ties. This was orchestrated erasure. They hadn't abandoned me. They'd constructed my death with intention. Legal death, social death. And they nearly pulled it off. That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened my old laptop and stared at the blank screen. I made a list, skills I had, certifications I could complete, ideas that kept me up at night. Clarabelle's voice echoed in my head. "Your hands want to build something." I enrolled in free business webinars during the day and continued night shifts to survive. I taught myself how to code enough to be dangerous. I worked with a community center tech lab to test prototypes. My idea was simple. Streamlined tech support for family caregivers who were overwhelmed and ignored by the system. It wasn't much, not at first. But it was something that could grow. They buried me in ink and filed it away. So I would rise in the same way, through paperwork, contracts, legality, legitimacy. I sent my first invoice as a registered business entity 6 months later. The client? A woman who'd found me through Clarabelle's friend network. The amount? $200. But it might as well have been $2 million. I looked at the check before cashing it. It had my new name on it, the name I'd chosen, the name they hadn't. This time, the ink was mine. They buried me in paper. I'm going to resurrect myself in ink and contracts. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and clearly expensive, the kind sold in boutique paper shops for wedding invitations or handwritten condolences. No return address, no stamp that gave it away. It was dropped at my door by someone who knew it mattered. I knew that handwriting. Even after a decade, I would have recognized it on a crumpled receipt. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Only one person I knew still wrote letters. Aviana, my mother's older sister, my aunt. The only person in my family who ever dared ask questions at a table built on silence. The first line hit like a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I never believed it, not for 1 second. The words weren't fancy. They didn't try to soften anything. Just truth, pressed into paper. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring out the window. The sky over Paradise Valley was pale and cloudless. My parents were still in the guest suite, sleeping like nothing had ever happened. And here I was, holding proof that someone had remembered me. Someone had never stopped looking. In families like mine, silence is tradition. You're taught early. Don't ask, don't disrupt. Let appearances hold. Keep the surface smooth, even if everything underneath is rotting. Aviana was the only one who ever questioned that. I remembered the last time I saw her. It was at a family brunch, probably one of those obligatory post-holiday "We're Still United" showcases. My mother had just praised Imogen's promotion, subtly hinted that I'd stepped away from the corporate path for personal reasons. I was sitting there, picking at a dry croissant, trying not to scream. Aviana leaned in as she passed behind me. "Don't let them rewrite your story," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I turned. She kept walking. That was the day I realized someone else saw the manipulation too. Later that year, after the funeral I wasn't invited to, I wrote her a letter. I didn't know where she was. She'd moved out of state after a fight with my mother, but I'd found an address in Santa Fe. I poured everything into that letter. My pain, my questions, my longing for just one person to believe me. No reply came. I checked the mailbox every day for weeks. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself she didn't want to be involved. Or worse, maybe she'd chosen to believe them too. Maybe she'd read the obituary, seen the slideshow, and decided I was better off dead. But she had replied. And now, I held the letter that should have reached me years ago. In this new envelope, along with her latest note, was a yellowed, creased letter. Unsent. Unopened until now. She had written back. Her handwriting was slanted but steady. "You have every right to be angry. But please don't disappear. The world needs people who fight quiet battles like you do. They buried you for their own comfort, not truth." The ink had faded at the edges. The letter smelled faintly of lavender and dust. I read it 3 times before folding it again. There was nothing dramatic about the language, no calls for revenge, just clarity, compassion, and a kind of strength I hadn't let myself feel in years. But along with the warmth, bitterness bloomed in my chest. Someone had kept this from me. I closed my eyes and replayed the timeline. The weeks after I sent that letter, Imogen had shown up, unannounced, bearing flowers and a pre-rehearsed apology. She'd said she missed me, that she wanted to talk. We'd had tea. She lingered. She asked questions about where I kept important documents. When she left, one of my desk drawers, the one I always kept locked, was slightly ajar. I chalked it up to stress, to paranoia. Now I knew better. Imogen had taken the letter. I didn't have proof. No camera footage, no smoking gun. But I knew. It made sense. The timeline matched. My mother had said, around the same period, "Your sister's too sensitive for correspondence. She cries too easily." They'd all played their roles so well. It wasn't just betrayal. It was deliberate control, precise. They hadn't just silenced me. They'd censored anyone who dared to remember me. Aviana hadn't been at the funeral. My mother had told everyone she was estranged, said she was unstable, too emotional, too angry, too much truth. And truth has no place in a story that requires a villain. They removed her from the family group texts, blocked her on Facebook, spread whispers at family gatherings that she'd had a breakdown, that she was obsessed with conspiracy theories. It didn't take much to discredit a woman past 50 in this family, just a few carefully planted lies. Looking back, I saw it all clearly now. They erased me from life, and they erased her from memory. But paper endures. Ink, folded and buried, still breathes. I pressed the letter to my chest and let myself feel it fully. Grief for the years lost, rage for the truth withheld, and something harder to name, a kind of resolve. I wasn't the only one they'd tried to erase, but I was still here, and so was the truth. There was never a moment when I sat down and said, "Today, I begin again." No dramatic turning point, just a long, slow walk out of the shadows and into the fluorescent lights of a community college night class, surrounded by people who'd lost just as much, some even more. I didn't want their sympathy. I didn't want their stories. I wanted skills. I signed up for everything free. Intro to digital marketing, basic coding for adults, how to register a business in Arizona. Most people didn't ask questions. The few who did got vague answers. I wore plain clothes, sat in the back, never raised my hand. I read manuals like they were holy texts. I borrowed books I couldn't afford, downloaded free PDFs, and watched YouTube tutorials until my eyes blurred. Slowly, I learned to navigate the language of entrepreneurship. From my work in caregiving, I already knew one thing. No one had time to coordinate care for elderly parents. Nurses missed appointments. Adult children got overwhelmed. Notes got lost on scraps of paper. So I sketched a system, basic but sharp. An app to centralize caregiving schedules, reminders, medication tracking. Nothing fancy. But it worked. I coded the prototype on a borrowed laptop, saving every iteration on flash drives I kept in different drawers, afraid one bad reboot would erase months of effort. I named the project Restora. It was the only name that sounded like healing without apology. I didn't want to beg for a seat at any table. I wanted to build one too solid for anyone to flip. "They erased my name," I whispered one night, staring at the loading screen. "I'll make it too big to ignore." The flyer said, "Pitch your idea. Win $10,000. It wasn't glamorous. A folding table event in a warehouse. Half the people were selling gluten-free sauces or smart dog bowls. But it was a shot, and I didn't have many. I wore a second-hand blazer 2 sizes too big and borrowed a laptop from a neighbor. My pitch was fast, clean, rehearsed until I could say it backward. I wasn't the most charismatic speaker. I didn't smile much. I knew what I had. I just needed someone else to see it. I didn't win. But as I was packing up, a man approached me. Gray beard, linen shirt, the look of someone who'd made money and no longer cared about impressing anyone. "You built that back end yourself?" he asked. "Yes." "What did you use?" "Firebase and Flutter for the base. I'm learning AWS. He nodded once. "Come by my office Monday." His name was Walter Levinson, former venture capitalist, semi-retired but bored. He told me over coffee that week, "Most people chase novelty. You're solving a pain point. That's what makes money." He didn't give me 10 grand. He gave me a desk, a real email address, mentorship. I bootstrapped my way forward, took odd jobs, built websites for local therapists, ran errands for seniors on weekends. Every dollar went back into the project. I learned how to invoice, how to negotiate contracts, how to speak in boardrooms without shrinking. The first time I sent out a client invoice under my company's name, Restora, LLC, I stared at it for an hour. My name was there, printed clearly, not the one my parents erased, the one I chose. It wasn't vengeance, not exactly, it was proof. Walter once told me, "The best revenge isn't success, it's forgetting they ever had the power to stop you." 2 years later, I was in the middle of debugging a calendar sync issue when my phone pinged. "Congrats on the feature," the text read, from a number I didn't recognize. I ignored it. Then another. "Just saw you on Channel 8. Amazing story." I froze. It turned out a local station had done a segment on emerging tech in elder care. My product was mentioned, not by me, not in a way I could control, but they had to cite the licensing paperwork for the app, state-registered documents, which meant they used my legal name. The one I'd been running from, the one they used in the obituary. I watched the clip. A cheerful anchor, blonde and bright-eyed, held up a screenshot of my app. Founded by Alethea Marie Gray, an Arizona native with a passion for restoring dignity to caregiving families. My coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen tile. Just like that, I was visible. Again, my phone lit up like Christmas. Emails, calls, a voicemail from a number I hadn't seen in over a decade. Arizona area code. It was only a matter of time. I didn't call anyone back. Instead, I scheduled an appointment to upgrade the security system. I locked away every document, scrubbed my online profiles, and met with my lawyer to review my estate plan. I wasn't hiding, I was preparing, because I knew what came next. They wouldn't write. They wouldn't call first. They'd show up. The day it happened, the sun was setting behind the mountains, casting that honeyed glow across the stucco walls of my backyard. I stood barefoot on the patio, a glass of wine in hand, watching the light fade. The intercom buzzed. I didn't jump. I walked to the monitor, pressed the button. "It's Mom and Dad. Can we talk?" Their voices so casual, as if this were a college break and not the aftermath of a burial. I didn't answer right away. I sipped my wine, breathed once, then pressed the gate release. "Let them in," I said to no one in particular. But only because I choose to. It started with a single article. I had done one short interview for a small local outlet, a human interest story about tech for seniors. Harmless, I thought. A little visibility might help with investor confidence, maybe bring in a few new users. It was supposed to be regional, tucked into a quiet corner of a weekly column nobody read outside of the neighborhood. Then it got syndicated. I woke up to my name, my full name, the one they tried to delete, printed on websites I hadn't visited in years. Featured in newsletters, quoted on social media. Alethea Marie Gray, founder of Restora, has reshaped how America supports its aging loved ones. Just like that, I was no longer a ghost. I was back, loudly, publicly, undeniably. I remember staring at the screen, unsure whether to laugh or throw up. After years of silence, success had screamed. The messages started rolling in. Some were warm. "So proud of you." Others stung. "Didn't you used to be gone?" A few were veiled threats, requests for a coffee chat from people who once watched me drown and handed me weights instead of lifelines. And then there was the call from the Arizona area code. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Success is louder than any funeral. A week later, a photo landed in my inbox, sent anonymously, no caption, just a JPEG of the family staircase, the wall that used to hold my school portraits. My image, taken when I was 11, braces and all, had been replaced. Same frame, same position, same lighting. Only now, it held Imogen's face. Her sitting in the same pose, styled similarly, wearing a pastel dress like the one I wore in the original. They hadn't just removed me, they'd painted over me. My stomach knotted. Rage didn't bubble. It solidified, cold, hard, settled like concrete in my chest. The audacity, the strategy, it wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate erasure. I remembered the last time I stood in that hallway, years ago. My mother had casually said, "That wall needed fresh memories." At the time, it stung but passed. Now I understood. It wasn't about fresh memories. It was about rewriting the narrative entirely. They didn't forget me. They replaced me. So when they sat in my living room, sipping water offered by my assistant, I watched them closely, not like guests, like intruders, trespassers in a story they no longer owned. They sat across from me on the couch. My mother wore pale blue, as if soft tones could soften consequences. My father wore gray, always neutral, always blending. They looked around the space like they were touring a museum of someone else's resilience. "We're so proud of you," my father said. I didn't blink. "I don't remember being your daughter. I remember being your obituary." Silence. My mother smiled, tight, practiced. "We're getting older. We just want to reconnect." "The past is the past." "No," I said, my voice flat. "The past is public record now." She glanced at the assistant in the corner, uncomfortable. I didn't offer privacy. Transparency was the new language. "You've built something incredible," she tried again. "It's really impressive." I leaned forward. "Then why did you hang her photo where mine used to be?" The crack appeared in her expression, subtle but real. What are you talking about?" Don't insult both of us, Mother. You know exactly what I'm talking about. My father shifted, eyes flicking between us. You replaced me, I said. Not just emotionally, visibly. You framed her as me. That's not, she started. Don't finish that sentence unless it's an apology, I said. They said nothing. I kept my composure. The walls around me, glass, stone, reinforced concrete, felt more secure than the family I'd once believed in. The article went live on Thursday, I continued. You called on Friday. More silence. Between those two events, I received 32 messages from people I hadn't heard from in 9 years. Most offered congratulations. Some were requests for reconnection. You were the only ones who showed up in person. That should mean something, my father said, low. It does, I said. It means you realized you couldn't control the narrative anymore. I stood and paced slowly, deliberately. Every step was mine. My name is back in the public eye. My product is scaling. I've signed contracts with hospital networks across 3 states. My legal documents are airtight. My security system is monitored by a firm that answers to no one but me. I looked at them directly. You came because I'm useful again, not because you missed me. My mother's eyes welled. I didn't care. My father tried to speak. I raised a hand. I don't want apologies. I want accountability. They didn't have that. They never did. I walked to the cabinet, pulled out a folder, and placed it on the table. My estate plan, my power of attorney, my trust documents, not as a threat, just clarity. Your names are not in any of this, I said, and they never will be. They looked stunned. You don't need to be punished, I said. You just don't get to benefit. I stared at them, emotionless. They weren't here to fix what they broke, I thought, as my mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue she had brought herself, no doubt for this exact moment. They were here to benefit from what I built. They had come expecting sentiment, closure, maybe even a bridge back into my life. They found walls instead. Let's be clear, I said, walking back to my seat, sitting with ease. This isn't a family reunion. This is a meeting between the living and the ghosts they left behind. I should have known the moment they stepped into my home with those bright, strange smiles that this visit wasn't about love. Their expressions were too careful, their gestures too polished, like they'd practiced sincerity in the car on the way over. My mother's voice was soft, syrupy, but every word tasted like a script. We're so glad you're alive, she said, clasping her hands like she was at a Sunday service. We've been praying all these years. For what? I asked. Resurrection? Or silence? Her face flickered, just for a second. Then she recovered. We thought we'd lost you, Alethea. But seeing you now, it's a miracle. Funny, I said, walking to the sideboard for a drink I didn't need. How the miracle happened right after Forbes named me one of the top 5 tech innovators under 40. My father stayed quiet, of course. Always quiet. Always watching. His eyes moved across the living room the way he used to skim spreadsheets. Calculating. Noticing. Assigning value. The longer they sat there, the more I felt like an exhibit, some artifact they'd thought long gone, suddenly priceless again. I stayed standing, arms folded. They weren't here to reconnect. They were here to stake a claim. So, I asked, why are you really here? My mother's expression softened. Too quickly. That pivot from emotion to calculation, I knew it well. She leaned forward slightly, smoothing her blouse like it gave her control. We just want a chance to repair things, to understand. A knock interrupted her. 3 soft raps. When I opened the door, I saw Imogen, and next to her stood a boy, no older than 7. He looked up at me with wide eyes and ran forward, arms outstretched. Mommy? Everything stopped, even the air. I felt the floor tilt beneath me as he wrapped his small arms around my waist. I froze. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Behind him, Imogen looked pale. It's complicated. The boy clung to me. You smell like the lady in my dream. I knelt, gently easing his arms off me. What's your name, sweetheart? Milo, he said brightly. My knees buckled. Milo. My favorite name, the one I always said I'd give my first son. No one knew that except family. I'd written it in diaries, said it aloud when I was 16, and dreaming of a life far from theirs. A name I had buried, along with the rest of myself. I looked up at Imogen. Start talking. She fidgeted with her handbag. There were legal things. After they declared, well, we thought you weren't coming back. The court approved the guardianship. They needed someone. Milo needed someone. You used my death certificate to file adoption paperwork? Imogen stepped inside cautiously. It was more like a guardianship, not adoption, not officially. You used my grave, I said. You filled it with a life. No one spoke. The boy wandered to the bookshelf, running his fingers along the titles. I turned to my parents. You all knew? My father looked at the rug. My mother's voice cracked. He needed a home, Alethea, and we thought you were— I wasn't, I snapped. You knew I wasn't. You knew. The boy looked up. Why is everyone mad? Imogen stepped forward, her tone urgent. He thinks I'm his mom. Please, don't confuse him. He's happy. He's safe. You don't want to ruin him, do you? He's a person, I said, not a prop. She blinked, then added, You're not going to take him, are you? I couldn't answer that, not with him standing there. He looked at me, eyes clear, voice soft. Are you really my mommy? I felt something tear inside me. I had nothing to offer him but truth. And right now, truth was a blade. I crouched down to his level, forcing a smile. I'm someone who cares very much about you. He tilted his head. But not my mom? No, I whispered. Not your mom. He nodded slowly, then returned to Imogen's side, wrapping a hand around hers. I stood, looked at the three adults in front of me, and said what I should have said years ago. Get out, all of you, now. They hesitated. I raised my voice. Out? Or I call security. My father moved first. Imogen followed, glancing back once with something that might have been shame. My mother lingered, lips parted as if she still believed words could fix this. They left, and the house fell quiet again. Only now it wasn't peace. It was aftermath. I sat in the dark of my office, no lights, no music, nothing but the faint ticking of the grandfather clock I'd inherited from a neighbor who'd passed away last fall. I replayed everything, the knock, the boy's voice, the look on Imogen's face. They didn't just steal my life. They repackaged it, rebranded it, reused the ashes I left behind to build something new, something clean, something untainted by resistance. My assistant tapped on the door. Do you want tea? I couldn't speak. I nodded. She left quietly. I opened my laptop, typed one word into the search bar, revocation. Then I opened a folder of legal documents, found the guardianship filings, the false signatures, the affidavits, the dates. They had used my name like it belonged to them. Well, it still belonged to me. I wasn't sure what I'd do next, but I knew this much. I wouldn't disappear again. I would reclaim what was mine. Even if I had to dismantle their entire illusion to do it, they forged a life in my name. Let's see how they do when I take it back. The safe clicked open like it had done 100 times before, but tonight, my fingers lingered. The metal door felt colder than usual, like it knew what I was about to pull out. My hand reached in and retrieved the one document they had hoped I'd never see again, the certified copy of my own death certificate. I held it in front of me, the thick paper edges curling ever so slightly under my grip. My name, my birth date, and the declared date of death, every detail etched with the kind of precision reserved for truth. But it was all a lie they built their lives around. They told the world I was gone, I whispered to myself, but they forgot I kept receipts. The dining room felt almost too quiet as I entered with the document tucked neatly into a manila folder. Everyone was already seated. Imogen wore a soft peach blouse and a weaponized smile, pretending this dinner was a peace offering. My father was nursing a bourbon. My mother barely glanced up from her plate. I placed the folder in the center of the table, opened it, and gently slid the certificate across. It stopped inches from Imogen's wine glass. She blinked twice, as if trying to place what she was looking at. And then, like the flip of a switch, her smile evaporated. "What is this?" she asked, voice tight. "That," I said, "is what you told the world, legally filed, notarized, and entered into public record. Apparently, I died 2 years ago." My father pushed back from the table. "Let's not do this here." "Sit," I said, sharp but steady. "We are doing it exactly here." I pointed to the date of death. "You forged this. You faked the coroner's report, the signatures. You fabricated a narrative so clean and final, no one would think to question it." My mother didn't flinch. She wiped the corner of her mouth with a cloth napkin and said with absolute coldness, "We did what was necessary." "And now," I replied, staring straight at her, "so will I." The room stayed silent, each second stretching like a rubber band ready to snap. But I wasn't finished, not even close. Earlier that week, I had made a phone call I'd long debated. Mrs. Tansey, the old housekeeper, lived quietly in a trailer park on the outskirts of town. She hadn't answered my calls in years, likely out of guilt. But this time, she picked up. She didn't have much to say at first. Her voice cracked. Her hands shook. But by the next morning, I had a video file in my inbox. It was grainy, clearly recorded from an old flip phone. But it was all I needed. I pressed play. The screen came alive with the image of Mrs. Tansey sitting on a plastic lawn chair, wind blowing her gray hair across her glasses. Her voice was small, but every word hit like a hammer. I watched them plan it. Watched them dress the mannequin and put it in that coffin. I was paid to forward her mail to a P.O. box in Imogen's name. I was told to burn every letter she wrote home. I knew it wasn't right. I knew Alethea wasn't dead, but I was scared. Scared of them. She paused, trembling visibly. She never died. They just decided it was easier to pretend she had. When the video ended, no one moved. My mother's fork hung mid-air. My father's jaw clenched so tight I could see the veins in his neck. Even Milo, who had always played neutral, looked like he'd seen a ghost. "That woman was unstable," my mother snapped, rising to her feet. "You paid her," I said coolly. "You used her fear." My father stood, reaching for his coat. "This is ridiculous. You're making a spectacle." "No, Dad," I cut him off, rising slowly. "You already did. I'm just giving it subtitles." Imogen's hands trembled. Her mascara smudged as she wiped tears that seemed more about being exposed than remorse. "You don't understand, Alethea. It wasn't like that. We had to protect the family. The business." I leaned forward, elbows on the table, steady as a surgeon. "Protect it from what? From me?" I didn't wait for a response. That night, I uploaded the video to a private YouTube link, encrypted it, and sent it to my lawyer. My assistant forwarded it to select investors and media contacts. I didn't add commentary or ask for sympathy, just one line. They told everyone I was dead. This is the truth. The fallout was immediate. My lawyer called within the hour, voice tight with urgency, already strategizing around defamation, emotional abuse, identity fraud. Headlines popped up like weeds after rain. My face, unedited and unforgiving, started to circulate again. But this time, I wasn't a scandal. I was the scandal breaker. Press inquiries flooded in. My assistant, bless her, had already filtered the worst of them. And still, my inbox looked like a war zone. But amid all that chaos, I found myself back at my window. The chair creaked softly as I sank into it. I stared out at the moonlit lawn, wineglass in hand, and for the first time in years, my reflection in the window didn't feel like a stranger. "If justice is loud," I murmured, "why does it still feel so silent after?" The house was quiet. Too quiet. I imagined my family back in their respective corners of denial, scrambling, panicking, calculating. I knew what would come next. Retaliation, denial, maybe lawsuits, maybe threats. But none of that scared me anymore. Because this had never been about revenge. It was about standing in a truth they spent years burying. I turned off my phone, silencing the world. The wine was warm in my throat. My body felt heavier than it should, but my mind was steel. "It's out now," I whispered, half to myself, half to the silence. And then, as I pulled the curtain shut and walked away from the window, I said it again, this time louder. "You can't bury someone who already learned how to rise." The meeting room at Rosenkeller was cold, designed to be sterile and unimpressed by emotion. I sat across from Alan, my estate attorney, who looked more uncomfortable than I'd ever seen him. He slid a file toward me, his fingers lingering just enough to say, "I didn't want to be the one to tell you this." I opened it, slow and deliberate. Inside, a formal petition stamped and signed, submitted by none other than my own parents. They were requesting what they described as a temporary inclusion in the estate of Alethea Granger for emergency financial provision. The legal phrasing twisted my stomach. "Dependent kin seeking beneficiary status," it read. I closed the folder with one hand and looked up at Alan. "This is real?" He nodded. "They submitted it last week, quietly, hoping you'd agree without too many questions." I couldn't even laugh. It was too far past irony, too deep into the absurd. "They buried me in paper," I murmured, more to myself than to him. "And now they want to dig me up with a pen." The weight of it settled in fast. Of course, this wasn't about reconciliation or guilt or truth. It was always about control, leveraging whatever version of me best suited their gain. Alive, dead, publicly disgraced, whatever worked. Back at home, I started pulling threads. A few phone calls, a discreet background search, and the picture became painfully clear. Foreclosure notices stacked on their mortgage. 2 defaulted business loans under my father's name. A lien against my mother's boutique for unpaid taxes. They weren't crawling back because of regret. They were collapsing. I invited them to my place the next evening, civilized, under the illusion of conversation. My mother arrived wearing oversized sunglasses, the kind that tried to hide exhaustion. My father's tie was crooked, his suit clearly worn too many times without pressing. We sat in the garden, the sun low, cicadas humming. "I read your request," I said, keeping my voice even. "I see now that my resurrection was timed just right." They both stiffened. "If I were still dead, you'd be out of options, so why not resurrect me, right?" My mother opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "I also see the foreclosure," I continued. "The accounts, the debts, the lies stacked like unpaid bills." My father's eyes dropped to the stone tiles underfoot. "We needed help," my mother finally whispered. "We thought if we approached gently—" "You didn't come to fix the past," I cut in. "You came to cash in the future." The truth hung there. Not sharp, not cruel, just plain and dry, like dust. Later, I found Imogen by the pool. She was scrolling through her phone, pretending to be indifferent, but I knew she was bracing. "I want to ask you something," I said, standing at her side. She looked up, trying to smirk, but her eyes betrayed her. "Always so dramatic. Do you remember the letter from Aunt Aviana?" Her fingers tensed. "I found it," I continued. "Or rather, what was supposed to be that letter. It never reached me, and I know why." She scoffed. "You think I'd waste time intercepting mail?" I pulled out a printed scan, handed it to her. "Your handwriting. Right on the back flap. Redirected to your apartment's address." Imogen stared at it, lips parted like she was still deciding whether to lie or surrender. Finally, she said, almost under her breath, "I was afraid if you came back, everything would go to you. You always had the fight in you. I only had proximity. And you never had the courage to earn it," I replied, level and final. I turned and walked away, not because I was angry, but because I was done. The next morning, I sat across from Alan again, this time with clarity. We restructured the trust. Not a single family member was included by bloodline alone. Everything now required named designations, notarized and time-stamped. There would be no loopholes. Meanwhile, the confession video had a second life online. More journalists picked it up. One talk show requested an interview. I declined. What mattered more were the quiet messages. One from a former executive at my father's company, confirming unethical financial dealings, suggesting federal interest might follow. My parents' social circles began to unravel, dinners canceled, invitations revoked. Their curated image, polished over decades, began to crumble under scrutiny. I didn't gloat. I didn't post cryptic quotes. I watched the implosion like someone watches a house burn from a safe distance, too far to feel the heat, too close to forget the smell. Among all the chaos, a plain envelope arrived one afternoon. No return address, just a shaky scrawl I recognized instantly. Milo. Inside, a single sheet of paper, written in blue and green crayon. I don't know why everyone is mad, but I liked your garden. Can I visit again? It stopped me cold. That tiny note, misspelled and pure, carried more weight than 100 press clippings. He didn't care about lawsuits or shame or inheritance. He remembered flowers and laughter and the one person who looked him in the eye. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside the first check I ever wrote to myself, proof that I had once chosen me. Legacy isn't who remembers you, it's who grows from you. I'd been written out of their story, but now I was the author. It started with a nondescript envelope delivered by courier, no fanfare, no urgency in the label. But as soon as I saw the seal from the State Office of Claims, my chest tightened. Alan had mentioned this might happen. Still, I wasn't ready for what I was about to read. Inside was a redacted document confirming what I suspected but hadn't dared put into words. A life insurance claim, filed 32 days after my death, paid out in full $280,000. The beneficiary listed, a trust account held exclusively under the name Dimity Granger. They didn't just fake my death, they made money off it. I reread the language over and over, not because I didn't understand, but because I needed to believe it was real. The file included a scan of the claim form. At the bottom, in faint blue ink, was my father's signature. There was no shock left in me, just a cold, heavy calculation, the same kind my mother used to talk about when she was drilling estate law into my head like it was gospel. "Nothing matters unless it's in writing," she once told me, flipping through thick binders at the kitchen table, sipping decaf and redlining her own will like it was a novel in edits. They were always planning for the worst-case scenario. I just didn't realize I was the scenario. I remembered my second year of college, when my tuition mysteriously cleared after a financial aid mix-up. I'd thought it was luck, but now, looking back, I could almost hear her voice. If you can't control people, control the paperwork. The payout had come in quietly. No trust fund for me, no beneficiary alert. Just a private account, protected and profited from, while I was technically buried. But what rattled me most wasn't the money. It was what came next. A friend from New Mexico forwarded me a photo sent by a tourist who visited a church cemetery in Phoenix. In the image, rows of polished headstones, morning light casting long shadows. And right there, in the center, a smooth, engraved marble slab that read, Alethea M. Gray, 1984-2016, beloved daughter, taken too soon, always remembered. I stared at it for what felt like hours, not crying, not screaming, just staring, like my own ghost finally made eye contact. I booked a flight under an alias and made the trip the following week. The cemetery was as peaceful as the photo made it seem. The staff didn't ask questions. I kept my sunglasses on, hoodie pulled low. No one recognized me. Why would they? The woman buried here was dead. I found the grave quickly, too quickly. It sat beside a sycamore tree, the earth neatly tended. Someone had left flowers, not fresh, but not forgotten either. I knelt beside it, hands in my jacket pockets, and said nothing for a while. The wind was dry, pushing dust across the path behind me. I remembered telling my mother once, after a family friend passed suddenly, "If anything happens to me, I want to be cremated." "No stone. Scatter me somewhere alive." She'd nodded without looking up from her magazine. Even my burial wishes weren't respected. I laughed, bitter and low, then whispered, "I'm alive, and they still tried to bury me." I took a picture of the headstone, then stood and walked away. When I got back home, I hired a private investigator to trace the insurance funds. I needed facts, dates, amounts, transfers. No more feelings, just data. It didn't take long. The money had been moved in chunks, $15,000 here to cover the down payment on Imogen's boutique space, $32,000 to buy out the last of the mortgage on my parents' home. Smaller amounts distributed over time for legal fees, vacations, wardrobe updates. They hadn't just survived on my name, they'd flourished. Alan compiled the documents into my case file, adding them to the growing stack of affidavits, screenshots, bank statements. He asked me if I wanted to go public. I shook my head. Not yet. Instead, I focused on impact. We drafted the foundation for a civil suit, not out of revenge, but to establish precedent. This case isn't about me, I told him. It's for anyone who's ever been legally erased by the people who claim to love them. The momentum picked up. Articles circulated. Podcasts invited me to speak. A nonprofit contacted me, asked if I'd join a panel on legal abuse among elders and dependents. I said yes, but the noise didn't drown the ache. There was still one last thing tethering me to the lie. The grave. So I returned. Quietly. Not with cameras, not with closure speeches or dramatic music. Just me, a pair of gloves, a crowbar, and a hammer. The cemetery was empty. It was late afternoon, too hot for visitors. I knelt beside the stone, traced the carved letters with my gloved fingers, then went to work. I didn't smash it. I unscrewed the mounting bolts. It took time, and sweat, and patience. The stone was heavy, ridiculously so. I had to brace my knees and back to lift it into the trunk of my rental SUV. I drove out into the desert, past the rest stops, the ghost towns, the old billboard that read, "Cold beer rattlesnake eggs." When I found a spot deep enough from the road, I parked. With a shovel I'd bought that morning, I dug 6 feet of scorched earth. Sand and rock fought back, but I kept going. When I finally lowered the stone in, the sun was bleeding into the horizon. I stood there, sweating, dusty, and alive. I was never in that grave, I said aloud, but I've carried it long enough. I filled the hole, packed the dirt, left no marker. Then I got in the car and drove away, not once looking in the rearview. Let them search for the stone. They'll never find it, just like the version of me they tried to kill. The envelope came on a Tuesday, no return address, but the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. My cousin Elena's. I stared at it for a moment before sliding my thumb beneath the flap. Inside was a simple card, ivory paper with silver lettering, the kind you'd use for a retirement party, not a reckoning. We're having a family dinner, not to debate, not to argue, just to breathe in the same space again. Come if you want, we'd like you there. Elena had always been the quiet observer, the one who never raised her voice but never looked away either. She hadn't picked sides, she didn't need to. She saw what she saw and stayed silent in a way that didn't feel complicit, just tired. I didn't RSVP, but I went. Not for them, not to soothe wounds they caused. I went because closure, in its truest form, has to be witnessed. The restaurant was a sleek place in downtown Phoenix, new enough to be trendy, expensive enough to be neutral. I arrived 15 minutes early and waited in the car, watching each car door open with the detached calm of a chess player. My father came in first, already pulling at his collar. My mother floated behind him, wearing beige and denial like matching accessories. Imogen trailed last, fiddling with her phone like she wanted to disappear. Inside, a long table awaited us. I was the last to take my seat. No one sat beside me. Dinner unfolded like a rehearsed scene from a community theater play. Everyone knew their lines, but none of them could act. The food was exquisite. The conversation, surface-level regret dressed up in passive verbs. I suppose things got complicated, my mother said, stirring her wine as if searching for forgiveness in its sediment. Imogen mentioned the weight of misunderstanding like she hadn't been the one pressing it down. No one said sorry. No one said, "We hurt you," but they each took turns implying they wished it had gone differently. I didn't challenge them. I didn't raise my voice or roll my eyes. I just ate, smiled when it felt polite, chewed slowly, because that was the point, wasn't it? They'd buried me once in silence. I wouldn't resurrect with noise. When dinner ended, I rose without ceremony. The check had already been covered. Probably by Elena, who nodded gently from across the room like a peacekeeper with boundaries. Outside, the desert air had cooled. The parking lot buzzed with the hum of street lamps and distant traffic. I was halfway to my car when I heard the soft crunch of footsteps behind me. Alethea, wait. It was Imogen. She walked up, arms crossed not from cold, but habit. Her mouth opened, then closed, like she'd rehearsed this too many times and forgot the script. She began. I didn't know what to say in there. Then don't say anything now, I replied, not unkindly. But she kept going. I never wanted you erased. I swear I didn't. I just didn't stop it either. I looked at her, not as my sister, but as a woman I once shared childhood with. I know, I said quietly. You didn't lie. You watched it happen. Her eyes welled up, not with crocodile tears, but the kind that sting before they spill. She didn't reach for me, didn't beg. She just stood there, bare in her guilt. I forgive you, I said. But that doesn't mean we're family again. She nodded once, like she'd already expected that answer. We parted without a hug, without drama, just distance sealed with acknowledgement. 2 days later, I hosted a gathering at my place, something I rarely did but felt called to. My assistant helped set up the backyard, string lights across the fence, soft jazz playing from a vintage speaker. It was the 3rd anniversary of our firm's official launch, a milestone no one had thought we'd hit, especially not with me at the helm. My team came. So did my mentor from law school, a woman who'd once offered me her guest room when I was homeless and invisible. Milo arrived too, bounding up the driveway with a grin and a bag of garden seeds he insisted we plant before the moon changed. Aviana followed shortly after, calm and warm as always, her eyes scanning me not with pity but pride. I raised a glass during the toast. Blood makes relatives, I began. But love makes family, and family shows up. They cheered, not loud, not boisterous, just enough to feel the truth in the air. Later that evening, I stood by the kitchen window, watching Milo play cards with my assistant under the patio lights. Inside, someone snapped a photo, me smiling at nothing in particular, not performing, just there. I turned and found Aviana beside me. Thank you, I said, for never writing me off. She smiled softly. You wrote yourself back in. That night, I journaled before bed. It had become habit again, ever since I stopped needing to document everything as evidence. Forgiveness is not always reconciliation, I wrote. Sometimes it's permission to walk away without hate. I ran my fingers along the drawer where Milo's letter still sat, folded beside Aviana's first postcard from 6 years ago. The one that simply said, "Keep breathing. You're not forgotten." I didn't plan to ever go back to the family house. Whatever energy lived there wasn't mine to reclaim. Some ghosts weren't worth chasing. Instead, I had something else on my calendar. A TEDx talk. My first? The title already chosen. Resurrecting the Self After They Bury You Alive. It wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about voice. I didn't get the ending I wanted from them, so I wrote a new one for me. Maybe closure isn't a door. It's learning how to walk away from the one they locked behind you. The lights dimmed just enough for the red TEDx letters behind me to glow like embers. I stood center stage in Scottsdale, Arizona, gripping the clicker in my palm, not to steady my nerves, but to hold something real. The theme of the event was rewriting the narrative. And I didn't need to be reminded why I was here. The room was smaller than I expected, more intimate. Rows of people leaned forward, not to scrutinize, but to understand. I recognized a few faces, a journalist who once doubted my story, now silently taking notes, a trauma therapist who emailed me after the video went viral, 2 advocates from a legal abuse nonprofit, eyes already glistening. They came to hear the truth, not as scandal, but as strategy. I inhaled slowly, then began. My name is Alethea Gray, and 3 years ago, the state of Arizona declared me dead. There was no gasp, no whispers, just stillness. They erased my name. So I built a platform and carved it back in stone. I walked through the story, not as a victim, but as the architect of my return. I shared the logistics, how to protect your digital footprint, how to establish proof of life when others weaponize silence, how legal systems can both bury and resurrect identities. Midway through, I paused and held up a framed photo. It was the headstone, the one I had unearthed with my own hands, buried again under 6 feet of desert ground. They told the world I died, I said, voice steady. But they never asked me how I lived. There it was, the release. Not applause, not gasps, but an emotional wave that passed over the room like wind over tall grass. I ended the talk by saying, survival isn't a miracle, it's a method, and reclaiming your story isn't narcissism, it's necessity. The crowd stood. I didn't cry. I bowed once, stepped off stage, and never looked back. Weeks later, I filed the lawsuit. Not for headlines. Not even for vindication. For precedent, fraud, identity theft, emotional damages, financial manipulation. The suit had multiple layers, each one backed with evidence: the insurance payout ledger, video of the forged grave, the confession from Mrs. Tansey, financial trail of redirected funds, even my own notarized living documents that had been conveniently ignored. Dimity and Imogen tried to countersue, claimed defamation, that I had ruined their standing and weaponized narrative, but both their motions were dismissed before reaching a full hearing. I attended every session, sat in the second row, wore dark blazers and darker lipstick. I didn't speak in court. I didn't need to. The judge did. This court recognizes the plaintiff, Ms. Alethea Gray, was never legally deceased. As such, all actions taken under the pretense of her death, monetary gain, estate shifts, misrepresentation, constitute actionable fraud. She paused, then looked directly at the defense table. Oh, if you fake someone's death, don't be surprised when they return like a storm. Outside, Dimity shoved through paparazzi with sunglasses too large to hide her disbelief. Her photo landed on a few digital headlines, lips curled in mid-sentence, caught between rage and unraveling. But I didn't read the articles. I had no interest in becoming clickbait. Instead, I donated my speaker's fee to the nonprofit that helped me through the first legal steps of reclaiming identity. I asked them to set up a resource page in my name, not a tribute, a tool. Milo wrote again. This time, he drew a tree. The roots curled into letters that spelled my name, not the name they'd tried to erase, the name I chose to keep. I framed it and placed it in the hallway, beside the only photo I have of my grandmother holding me as a child, back when no one had yet tried to write me off. My app reached 1 million downloads. Quiet milestone. No party. Just a small update dedicated to those still silenced. The description read, "You are not invisible. You are not gone. We see you." I hosted dinner that month, not for family, but for a different kind of kin. Aviana was there, of course, my assistant, Milo. 3 women who'd written to me after my TEDx talk, each of them carrying versions of the same wound, each of them still trying to find words for what was taken. We didn't make toasts. We just sat together, ate, shared small smiles, spoke when it felt right, listened more than we talked. Sometimes healing sounds like silence. A few weeks after that, I walked into an independent bookstore on a slow Sunday afternoon. I wasn't looking for anything, just wandering, touching spines, reading back covers like I used to when life felt simpler. Near the front, on a display table, I saw it. Erased. How I rewrote my ending. My memoir. I didn't stop to flip through it. I didn't need to reread my own story. I'd written it. It belonged to others now. Closure doesn't arrive like a letter. It arrives like the moment you no longer have to explain your existence to anyone. It arrives when your name no longer needs defending. As I turned to leave, a man near the counter nudged his friend and whispered, "That's her." I didn't turn, didn't wave, didn't smile. I just kept walking into the sunlight. I died once, but I lived louder, and that's the only version that matters. Let them speak their version. I already published mine.